All right. Hi, team. Uh, Welcome to our third episode of Accessible Futures Live. I'm your host, Samantha Van Scoik. I am a white woman with short brown hair and long, dangly orange earrings today. I serve as the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships for CIL. CIL is a nonprofit real estate developer specializing in partnering with nonprofit service providers to develop safe, accessible, community-based housing. To learn more about what we do and how we do it, you can check out our website at cil.org. A quick note on accessibility. We are so pleased to have Pasquale here with us today to provide live ASL interpretation. Depending on what platform you're viewing live on, you may have access to live captioning as well. If you're watching us after the fact, you definitely have captioning. And we are always open to suggestions on how to make our content more accessible. So please let us know if there's anything we can improve. Before we welcome our guest, one note for our live viewers, we do plan on taking your questions, but we are on a 30-second delay. So as soon as you think of your question, drop it in the comments and we'll get to it as soon as we can. Today, we are here to talk about accessibility planning for providers, what it is, how we can approach it, and why we should. I'm so excited to have Michael Bloom, Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer for Encompass Human Services, joining us here today. Michael, welcome.
Hey, Sam. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with your journey. What brought you into this work and what continues to inspire you about serving people with IDD and their families?
Sure. So, I was actually kind of an unintentional entry into this field. I'm going to date myself now more than 30 years ago. I had finished getting a master's degree in psychology. I had done undergrad straight to grad school, and then wanted to look for work and relocate to New England. We were in the midst of a recession. Wasn't the most ideal time to find a job. And I got hired to be a direct support professional in a group home serving adults with IDD and autism. So that was my entry to the field. And after that, I kind of never looked back. It was a great experience. And after my initial work as a DSP, I did move up the management and leadership chains over the years for a few different provider agencies. But that very first position that I had for about 18 months, I didn't realize how much it would inform work that I do as a person, but also how I carry myself personally when I had to step into the role as being a family caregiver. I wasn't an only child, and my parents had me late in life. So when they were elderly, I stepped in to provide caregiving support to them as the primary caregiver. And everything I learned and got equipped with in that initial period that I served as a direct support professional really came to help me in supporting people when they were at their most vulnerable. And I just want to say that now at Encompass Human Services, my role as currently as Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer allows me to bring this lived perspective into strategy planning and systems change. And what keeps me inspired is seeing the care partnerships, the people we support with IDD, autism, and acquired brain injuries, and the people that support them, whether they be family or professional caregivers, receive the supports that they need so that they can thrive and build friendships, contribute to their communities, and live full lives.
Yeah, we always talk about at CIL that we know how to do housing, like we know how to build a house, but it's really the providers that make that house a home for people. And that inclusion piece is so critical and such a great thing that you guys really focus on. So let's talk accessibility planning and define the landscape a little bit. what does accessibility planning look like for HCBS providers? And are there any specific planning frameworks or tools or checklists that you've found particularly useful for when you approach it?
Sure. So it's really important to think about when you think about accessibility planning as a provider and anyone really, any of us as citizens, really, it's much more than it goes far beyond ramps and restrooms. That's the way we traditionally tend to think about it. When the ADA was passed many years ago, a lot of people focused on making sort of environmental structural changes.
Hmm.
Extremely important as a foundation because at the very basic, people need to have the ability to move from point A to point B accessibly
Hmm.
and to use facilities accessibly. At so at Encompass, we have to be, or we choose to be, but we also are required to be by regulation, CARF accredited. And the CARF framework on accessibility is really helpful to take into account because it has 9 categories or dimensions of accessibility to consider. And we've been really using this model for more than 15 years. And when CARF comes out, because we take it, we stress the importance or recognize the importance of it so much. We have not had any recommendations in this area because we fully look at those perspectives. And let me share what those perspectives are. Um, so they have to do with architectural or environmental barriers, which are the things that we talked about, the physical space. Attitudinal barriers, also important to consider in terms of you know dismantling, promoting dignity and respect and dismantling stereotypes and biases. And I would say even with that, to consider that with people with human rights, that people have a right to risk and a right to do things that don't just stay in assumptions in terms of what people can and cannot do. And the other ones I'll quickly go through are financial, employment, communication, technology, transportation, community integration. And then the final category is really get input from the people you support and other stakeholders and families and guardians, because you may think of things that don't neatly fit into one of those categories. So you can have an other category, or maybe they do once you research and explore that in more depth.
Yeah. The um, do you that was very comprehensive with the nine things to consider. Now, for anybody who might not be familiar with CARF, that's an acronym, CARF? All
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So it's an accreditation that certain organizations need to go through. It tends to be every 3 years. So, but even if you're a provider agency, you probably have licensing and certification indicators.
Mhm,
And so, being that we got the model from the framework from working in being in full conformance with CARF accreditation,
mhm,
I think these perspectives are provide a really user friendly framework
mhm.
for thinking about the different dimensions of accessibility.
Yeah, that's so helpful. Um, what do you see as like common gaps or misconceptions for organizations when they're approaching this?
Sure. So I think that one misconception could be that it's, working on accessibility or a plan, it's one and done.
Mhm,
These plans evolve over years, and it's constantly something you're going to be working on and looking back at. So, um, and then, again, don't stay with just being focused on physical space. Really think about looking at potential barriers around communication, especially and technology. I mean, technology is evolving at a very rapid pace right now. So it's giving new ways to think about how to make it more accessible to the people we support, families and others. And um, and then, as I mentioned before, I think sometimes we can for not think about attitudinal barriers, but they really are important. And I think especially in today's environment. I'm not going to get political here, but the people that we support, people with disabilities, have been seeking full inclusion for many, many years. That's not changed. And one way to live a full life, I think all of us, right? When we think about living as fully as we can, we think about the ability to learn and grow and sometimes stretch ourselves outside our comfort zone.
Mhm.
So how can we promote that right to risk, that
Yeah.
right to take, to
Mhm.
to to learn new things and grow and make that accessible too.
Yeah. That's something one of the people that was integral to founding CIL, his name was Quincy Abbott. And it's something we used to talk about all the time, that dignity of risk and how important that is uh, for people to have true independence. So it is very important. Um, Speaking to that as well, and I know you mentioned this a little bit, how can providers meaningfully engage individuals with lived experience in the planning and evaluation of accessibility initiatives?
Sure. The common one that one would think about is it's surveys are one certainly one tool to use that could get information. Just recognize though, surveys do provide a lot of information, and it's important to give people that gateway to submit their thoughts and opinions on satisfaction and potentially accessibility anonymously. I would also take other opportunities to talk to the people you support and their families about their vision. So at Encompass, when we work with individuals and families, we take a person-centered support approach, and part of that process, and we another framework we use the charting and the life course tools. There's great visioning tools there, and if you take the time to really understand what the aspirations and the vision are for the people you support and those that support them, you would start to unlock information about potential barriers and can use that to inform activities that can impact or potentially remove those barriers and then enhance inclusion. So those would be a few of the primary ways I would say.
Oh, yeah. Um, at Encompass, what have been some effective strategies for integrating accessibility planning into just your everyday operations?
Sure. So we embed accessibility into some other key plans. We do have a standalone accessibility plan, but at Encompass, um, we have a strategic plan. We're actually in the middle of what is our 5-year strategic plan. And that strategic plan was developed taking input from accessibility planning at the time, as well as input, as I said, from the people we supported, other stakeholders to develop that. So the accessibility plans within that, we also use a balanced scorecard
Mhm.
process, which is an annual goals and objectives that we have across lenses, and aspects of the accessibility plan are also married within that balanced scorecard as two, so that we can see those goals front and center. Stakeholder engagement is really important through this process. Again, nothing is one and done. So you want to gather input from persons served, families, staff, funders, other community members, especially employers of people with disabilities,
Mhm.
and then being transparent with the monitoring and the results. So um, we track progress on a quarterly basis with our plans. On an annual basis, our progress with accessibility plans, in particular, are shared with the board of directors. And we, at that time, make decisions about what we're moving forward with and focusing. And again, it's a cycle. It will
Yeah.
feed back into the balanced scorecard initiatives that we're working on.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for small to mid-sized providers who want to improve accessibility but might be feeling resource limited or maybe a little overwhelmed by the
Sure. Yes.
challenge.
Well, it's really understandable. And I know that earlier in this chat, I gave you 9 dimensions or perspectives. So if you're out there and you're feeling a bit overwhelmed by that, please don't let yourself be overwhelmed. So you could start small. Even if you use those uh, dimensions or categories as an information gathering to sort of list out what you perceive based on information that you've gathered in various ways or anecdotal information um, are barriers for the people you support and your other stakeholders. Uh, then you can prioritize. Choose one activity that you feel would make a difference because that really helps break this into a manageable chunk and will help with forward momentum. So it's really important to get started with some action that is achievable. And then you can build it out from there as you get more comfortable and your plan starts to get wings and take flight. You can then figure out how to work on many different barrier breaking actions at the same time.
Yeah. I do a lot of speaking about accessible communications, and I can see when I'm talking about all the different elements. I sometimes I can see in my attendees' faces like the overwhelm that's hitting them. And I like to emphasize, even if you do one thing to make it better, that's progress, and make it better is kind of like an internal mantra at CIL. It's just like, what's the one thing we can do. Um, so I think that's an important takeaway. Um, so I want to talk a little bit about culture and leadership and innovation, especially since innovation's in your title. um, so, as a self described culture champion, how do you foster buy in and momentum around accessibility with your teams and across the departments?
Sure. So I'm going to take a line from the playbook of our CEO Gene Phelps at Encompass Human Services. She said, "Culture is not created in the corner office." So
Mm-hmm.
culture in and of itself is not created by the leadership team either, of which I'm a part of, and that came from Encompass 6 years ago. Evolved after a merger of two legacy organizations that were chapters of the Arc of Massachusetts, and we engaged in an exploratory project with teams of staff that became a culture team to determine for the new merged organization what did we want our shared values and our culture to be. And at the end of that process, we came up with a culture statement, activities. Encompass was going through a branding to come up with the Encompass brand, and there were focus groups around that. And again, the values and the importance, and of course, inclusion and accessibility all were a part of that. My point of telling this story is, and you don't have to do a rebrand to have success with this activity, is if the people you support, families and other stakeholders feel like they are part of crafting what you're developing, they'll take ownership. So so that's really the importance of culture. And I so it really becomes part of their personal mission. And we have a care champion motif that came out of that work as well, which is about supporting people um, to live as fully as possible, but also paying attention. I was really proud of this because I didn't develop this statement. It takes innovation into account. You were asking about innovation. So I'm going to go to the obvious place right now with innovation. It's all about technology.
Mm-hmm.
It's a game changer. We're actually in most human service organizations, because they traditionally haven't, they've struggled with funding. Technology or having the latest has not always been the priority based
Mhm.
on needs. But you can go a lot further if you invest in the tools and the resources and the training to enhance the supports that can be provided, by looking at different platforms that are out there. So, and of course, exploring more assistive technology access for the people that you support. So again, going from communication devices to smart home tech, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So innovation really gets born out of reimagining service models,
Mhm.
and that basically there's all kinds of possibilities. Right now, we're looking towards adding without walls programming to our portfolio of services for people who are in our day services, and technology will be an important part of that in terms of how folks communicate with their supporters.
Great. So we have 5 more minutes left for our chat. So I want to encourage, if anybody is tuning in live, to drop any questions you might have in the chat, and we'll try to get to them. But for any service providers watching today, getting back to that earlier point of like, if I'm feeling overwhelmed, maybe there's like one thing I can start with. So what's one small step that they could take to move their accessibility efforts forward?
So think about somebody or something you've heard, and ask a question if that person has shared a barrier that is leading to fear, or concern about being able to fully participate. And then commit to that one action, reduce the barrier. I can give you a quick example.
Sure.
Through surveys and through case manager discussions, we have an adult family care program. And maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, several people were concerned managed care was really taking off, and people were concerned about being moved from traditional, in Massachusetts, Mass Health, which is Medicaid, to a managed care plan. Would they still have access to this vital adult family care service? We heard that, and we decided to study and look into what was out there, and really forge relationships with managed care organizations, so that when a family reported they had been switched, we could very quickly work with that entity to either figure out how to get credentialed to be a preferred provider, or
Mhm.
to seek the pathway for becoming an out of network provider, so that family did not lose support. And it was from that fear and that knowledge that we got that information, that we were able to focus on our efforts on that.
Wow. Yeah. Uh,
Just could start with one, and that's
yeah,
one of the most powerful things. I
that's
think. Just
huge. Yeah. Um, so we're coming to the end of our time. I'm not seeing any questions from the audience. So we always end our Accessible Futures episodes with this one question, which is, what does an accessible future mean to you?
Well, an accessible future is one where all of us, regardless of whether we've had lifelong disabilities or not, that when we need to gain access, accommodations are already built in. It's not something we need to request. So it would be a future where inclusion is the default, not the exception, and where providers and families, the people we support, and communities could work together to make true interdependence possible. And I like to use the term interdependence rather than independence, because none of us solely live or operate completely in an isolated bubble. It takes networks and connections and support. So partnerships are vital. So that's my vision, is that would be true accessibility.
Yeah, I love that. I love that definition. And I love the term interdependence. I think I might need to start using that. So, um, thank you again, Michael, for joining us today and sharing your wisdom. I found this very interesting. And thank you to everybody who watched live and anybody who's watching later. I hope everyone has a great week.